What's up guys, it's River, and today we're looking at the top 7 things that you should know about the Canon 90D if you're thinking of buying it or if you're just curious what all the hype is about. So let's do a brief dive, figure out exactly what this camera is about and if it's right for you. Let's get into it. And just a quick side note guys, all the products that we talk about will be down below in the description. So the first thing on our list is the fact that this camera does 4K without cropping. I love Canon's imagery, I love the colors, I love how sharp and detailed these images are, but the biggest drawback with every Canon camera has been the fact that they always crop the 4K image. This is the first Canon camera to not crop in 4K, so you get the full width of your sensor, you get wide shots. Overall, you just get a better image because you're not throwing away half of your sensor. You get a sharper image, you get better noise performance, and just an overall more cinematic image. So honestly, the 4K in this camera, 10 out of 10. If you shoot documentary or corporate work, this camera is perfect for you. One drawback this camera still has is the fact that it does not have CLog, and at the price point of this camera, I kind of wish it did, but there's a solution. You can easily get Pro Loss, which is just a manual setup of the neutral profile to make it flatter, give you a little bit more dynamic range. Or if you're willing to spend the 10 to 15 minutes, you can actually install something called CineStyle, which is a Canon lookup, or I guess like a Canon profile made by a company called Technicolor, which does Hollywood movies. They specifically made this Canon profile for when movies are like, hey, we shot this on Canon, can you make it match with our more expensive cameras? That is also available to you and it is free. And if you guys are interested in how to install that into your camera, I did a separate video called Video Review of the Canon 90D, where I just go over the video side of this camera and I also teach you guys how to install that profile into your camera, so be sure to check that out. But don't get me wrong, the standard and neutral mode in this camera are still fantastic and you're gonna get gorgeous, gorgeous images. But if you're someone that does high-level professional work and you know you're gonna need that extra bit of room to really push and pull your colors, that option is available to you with just a little bit of elbow grease. But it's important to know that there is no CLog built in. And something to note is that this camera is definitely built for a professional workflow and for video in mind. One of the first things that I noticed is that when you take the flip out screen to the side, it doesn't hit the headphone jack. Most cameras have the headphone jack right here and the flip out screen actually hits that headphone jack and you're always either breaking your mic or knocking your audio out, and you know, you're just ruining your shots. And on top of that, what I love is it has an LCD screen right here at the top, so I can just quickly look down, shutter, aperture, drive mode, ISO, all the important things that could make or break my shot are right there. It's just that much easier to work and not mess up my shot. This camera will totally suit someone that's a professional who's like paying their mortgage and their bills by just making videos. This camera will keep up with you. But I should mention, if you're not a professional, but you want that Canon look and you're okay with a bit of crop on your 4K, I'd maybe go for the M50, which is only about $600 to $650. You'll save a lot of money, you'll lose features like the robust body and the video design, but you'll get more or less the same image, and you're saving almost $1,000. And while we're on the topic of professional use for this camera, this is a very, very good camera, but it does have one small flaw that's easily fixable. The audio preamps in this camera are not the greatest. If you have them set too high, you're gonna get way too much hiss. I tend to set my preamps as low as I can in camera, so I'll just go into the menu settings and just set my audio as low as I can without losing too much of my audio. One, I won't get any hiss, and also, if your audio peaks on this camera, it is basically lost. The audio isn't ideal. Like if you are someone that is gonna be doing a lot of heavy documentary work and audio is an issue, I'd maybe look into the Canon C100 or C200, which has a proper audio section built right in. Like those cameras are about $8,000 to $10,000, but they might be worth it for professional use. What I've actually done is I've gotten one of these. It's a Zune recorder, and I actually record everything right into this external recorder, and then that external recorder goes into my camera, so I know that I'm getting good audio and a second source here no matter what. The audio situation in this camera isn't ideal, but that's only if you're a professional or a documentary filmmaker. For vloggers, for YouTube creators, or just someone that's like into making cool artsy videos, you will be just fine. And speaking of video, this camera has fantastic autofocus specifically for video. It's pretty easy to find a camera that does good autofocus for photos, but for video, it's pretty tricky. I would say Sony's the king, and Canon is right up there behind them, just like right there on the tails. Though personally, I think I prefer Canon's autofocus because when it racks focus from one thing to another, it's a much more smoother autofocus and it looks human, rather where Sony, you can tell a robot's doing it, but the autofocus in this camera is fantastic. It's great at object tracking and it's great at face tracking. And for someone that's doing documentary, shooting people a lot, following people a lot, this camera, perfect. And if you're someone that likes to make cool artsy videos with their camera, chances are you love doing slow motion. This camera also does 120 frames per second in full HD. And most cameras, when you go into 120 frames per second, the image quality goes down quite a bit. This camera holds up. The 120 frames per second in this camera looks great. I would actually say it looks better than the Sony cameras, and it doesn't fall apart when you start color grading it. The only small drawback, and I want to be as honest as possible with this, is that you have to go into an entirely separate mode to get 120 frames per second, and changing back from 120 back to real time is a bit of a hassle. And if you're doing music festivals or any kind of run and gun stuff, like maybe nightclub stuff, you're gonna lose shots. Going between 120 to real time is just not ideal. I definitely would recommend a Sony where you can just shoot in 120 frames per second continuously, or 60 frames per second continuously, and then just slow down whatever you need in post. But make no mistake, if you are someone that's going to be doing 120 frames per second selectively, this camera is a very good deal. Something to note, when you go into slow motion mode, audio and autofocus no longer work, but that's okay because you wouldn't need audio in slow motion anyways, and you wouldn't really be asking your camera to rack focus during a slow motion scene anyways, because otherwise you're gonna get this weird slow motion thing where the camera goes in focus, out of focus, and it's just gonna look weird. Usually if you're shooting slow motion, you would just set your focus to something and just have the subject move in and out. So personally, I don't think that's a deal breaker. And speaking of specialty shots, this camera is actually perfect for time lapses. Here's why. It actually is a very, very solid weatherproof body. You could totally leave it out in the weather, not worried about your camera getting rained on, and stop working. It's weatherproof, it will last, it will hold up for you, and it has a built-in time-lapse mode. One thing I really appreciate about Canon is that they put time-lapse mode into all of their cameras, but this camera has a slightly more robust time-lapse mode. This camera actually has different scenarios built right in, one for slow-moving objects, quick-moving objects, very, very fast-moving objects. Basically, whatever you kind of need, it'll kind of just give you a pre-setup already, especially useful if you don't really understand time lapses yet, you don't know how many frames per second or how often to make your camera go off. So it kind of does all that in camera for you, but also the actual menu system for setting up your own time lapse is really, really robust. You can really pick and choose everything. Honestly, it's as good as an intervalometer that you would buy from the store. And also it has a 32 megapixel sensor. That's a lot of resolution. You can zoom in, zoom out, stabilize your footage, no problem. As long as you don't need a full frame for your time lapses, this is a very, very good time lapse camera. Last but not least, no review would be complete if I didn't talk about the following. This camera is built like a tank. Now, I don't anticipate a zombie apocalypse anytime soon. I mean, no, I'm pretty sure there's no zombie apocalypse, but if I needed a weapon, if I needed to protect myself, this thing would totally hold up. It is built like a tank. This thing is weatherproof. I've dropped it like a lot. It will hold up, it will not let you down. If you're someone that's really traveling a lot, really beating up their camera, if you're planning on having this for like 6-7 years and you're really gonna put it through its paces, this camera would be perfect. I wouldn't actually recommend something like a mirrorless because as much as I love mirrorless cameras, they're not super solidly built, they're just not tanks. And also because of the bigger body design, you get a way, way bigger battery than a mirrorless. Mirrorless cameras are generally easier to travel with, but I think this is actually the perfect camera to travel with in terms of an APS-C sensor because it's robust, big battery, super high resolution sensor for an APS-C size camera, and just overall, the price is incredible. It's only about $1,000 to $1,200 depending on what region you live in. Overall, there's really not that much to complain about this camera. The audio isn't ideal, but again, I spent about $109 to get one of these and it totally fixes my audio issue. It doesn't have CLog. I wish there was some sort of flat profile, but it's pretty easy to install CineStyle or set up your own neutral profile, so to be honest, it's not the end of the world. And the thing that I love about it is the video's gorgeous, the autofocus is amazing, it's sharp and fast, and overall for a professional, and I mean a professional that's paying their bills with their videos, this camera will not let you down. I think this is a fantastic camera, especially considering the price point. Well guys, that wraps up our top 7 things to know about the Canon 90D. If you guys have any more advanced questions, let me know in the description down below. This was mainly just like a general brief overview for people in a rush. And also, there's a link in the description down below for the best pricing on this camera, so be sure to check it out if you are thinking of picking one up. Last but not least, make sure to leave me a like and subscribe to this channel. in my professional life, I'm actually a cinematographer. I shoot a lot of fashion commercials, sports commercials, and music videos. And this summer, I'm gonna be putting out a lot of content talking about what I do professionally, how to shoot certain things, a lot of technique-based stuff, a lot of industry-based stuff, and really talking about the business. So if you guys are interested in that kind of content, make sure to stay tuned to the channel. We're gonna be putting out a lot of awesome content this summer. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Talk to you soon.